In today's session, we are joined by Mr. Hassan Khawer, Senior International Development and Public Policy Expert and currently the team leader for SEED program, which is a 5-year sustainable energy and economic development program in KP. He's also a former civil servant and has worked on multiple projects across many countries in Asia and has a diverse experience. We are also privileged to have Mr. Temur Salim Khan Jagra, Provincial Minister for the Department of Finance and Government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. He'll be joining us shortly. He has been a member of the Provincial Assembly of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa since August 2018 and is the head of policy unit at PTI and a mechanical engineer by qualification and holds a business administration degree from London Business School. Dr. Waqar Ahmed is Joint Executive Director at SDPI. He is also Head of Economic Growth Unit in SDPI. Dr. Ahmed serves in advisory capacity at many national, regional, and international institutions and forums, and he will be giving a presentation on the report today. Thank you for joining us. Without further delays, I would request Mr. Hassan Khawer to formally start the proceeding with his opening remarks. Over to you, Mr. Hassan.
Ji, thank you, Aisha. Thank you, everyone, for sparing time and joining us for this fairly brief launch event for the policy note that we have developed jointly with SDPI. Dr. Waqar Sahab is here representing SDPI. Let me give you a very quick overview of why we are doing this, what SEED is, and where are we going. So SEED is a UK aid-funded program working very closely with government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with the aim to increase private investment, public investment, as well as increase public investment efficiency. Now, when we started working with government of KP, we realized that if public investment is to increase, there is no dearth of political will because all the political leaders, they wanted to spend more money because that's, of course, something a politician would want to do. So no dearth of political will. But what is keeping them away for increasing the quantum of public investment is the volume of the fiscal space. And you know that in Pakistan, it's not just with KP, it's with Punjab, with Sindh, with the federal government, that over the years, the size of the government has increased, the pension liabilities have increased, the salary bill has increased, and the recurrent side of the budget takes away the lion's share of the budget, leaving very little money to invest on development program. So we knew that if public investment is to increase, then government has to, of course, increase its revenue, but also reduce the expenditure or optimize the expenditure. And when we started talking to the government of KP, they said, well, pension is something that we have been concerned about, we have been thinking about, so how could you help? And this conversation, this engagement started last year when SEED started and we started speaking to the government counterparts. And of course, it's politically a very complex issue because there are a number of pensioners whose livelihood depend on government pensions. So you cannot not have compassion and do these reforms. So we kind of started working towards something which you can say compassionate pension reforms, and I'll come to that in a minute. So we started engaging with finance department. We started reviewing the pension rules, the pension funds and everything. And then as part of the process, we developed new pension rules. We worked with government of KP. We raised our voice. We brought together stakeholders onto one table until very recently. And right now is an apt time, both in terms of our work as well as where government of KP is to kind of launch this policy note and to show you what government of KP is doing. So I just have like a couple of slides. So let me share my screen with you very quickly. So this is one slide which can tell you the whole story of pensions. And basically, if you look at the bar chart, the green bars are the salaries and the yellow bars are the pensions. And you can see that they have been growing at the rate of 14.5% on average. And this growth rate has been calculated based on the last 8-9 years. And if you look at the total receipts, which means government's own source revenue, as well as fiscal transfers from the federal government. they have been growing at 8%. And if they keep on growing at the same pace, and we don't have any reason to believe otherwise, then as you can see, that somewhere in 2026, 27, government will run out money to do anything. And I'm not saying it's the running out of money to invest. It is also the non-salary expenditure of the recurrent budget, which means that the government will not have money to put fuels in the car. The government would not have money to pay electricity bills. The government would not have money to buy stationery. And of course, the government would not have money to invest. And, and for everything else, the government will need to borrow. Now, this is a story, and this is something which we are calling fiscal cliff. Now, this is a story which is not just specific to KP. You look at pension liabilities of Punjab, federal government, any other government, and you come across the same story. And the problem is so huge that all the governments would need to do something. And I'm very glad that KP is the first government that's moving in this direction. But I think other governments would also need to follow fairly quickly. Now, how are other countries managing that? And I'm sure Dr. Saab will say more on this. But basically, there are two things. One is whether your pension liabilities are funded or unfunded. And right now, Pakistan, KP, Punjab, everyone has unfunded liabilities. And while the rest of the world, or pretty much bulk of the other parts of the world, has funded pension liabilities. So what do we mean by funded and unfunded? When we say funded liabilities, it means that someone, as we recruit more people and as we expect people to retire, someone is keeping money away to pay them once they retire so that their future is secure. And if we have enough money to pay them, then it means it's a fully funded system. And who is going to pay that? So it can be a combination. Government can make that contribution, employees can make that contribution. And generally, if employees make that contribution, then it's a contributory scheme. And then most of the schemes are defined contributory schemes, which means that we will give them best investment vehicles, they will contribute, but then their contributions can grow into sound investments. But whatever those investments are, those will be paid back to the pensioner rather than a defined benefit. Because when you define the benefit and you cannot forecast the future accurately, then you cannot hedge your liabilities, then you cannot model them, then you cannot plan for them. So this is something on which pretty much the entire world agrees. I think what's difficult is how to kind of transition from unfunded defined benefit system to a fully funded or at least partially funded defined contribution system. And that is the challenge. And I think it's a long journey that we need to undergo. So my last slide is about what's happened recently. And I'm sure if we can get the finance minister to join us soon, he's right now in the assembly session, he can say more about it. But the cabinet recently, before the budget, approved some changes. So, and then those changes were also announced in the budget. So KP is the first province to change the pension rules, to make the beneficiary structure more rational, but at the same time, increasing pension payments for widows so that they are taken care of. And that's why we are using the term compassionate pension reform. So that's one. The second is they are raising the age for minimum retirement. And most importantly, what they have announced is that from 1st of July, any new government employees will be taken on to a contributory pension scheme. And that is the first step towards changing the pension system, because that means whatever has happened. We are not going to repeat that in future. We will discuss what will happen to the pension schemes of the existing employees and pensioners, but that's an entirely different discussion. But let's put an end to what we have been doing and let's transition, at least in terms of future, to how the world is managing this problem. And that's what KP has done. KP has taken that step, and I'm very glad that KP is setting an example for the rest of the country. As part of this conversation, as part of this engagement, SEED is working closely with SDPI. You all know SDPI, it's one of the leading think tanks of Pakistan. And we are commissioning a series of policy papers on which we are working very closely with SDPI. And these policy papers are going to highlight different aspects of pension reforms. And the first in this series is the one on fiscal sustainability of pension reform. And that note will be available online after this launch event. And that's the paper that Dr. Waqar is going to say more about. So I'm just going to stop here. Aisha, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Khawa, for your brief introduction of the SEED project and a concise background to government pensions and future fiscal sustainability. I'd now request Dr. Waqar Ahmed for a summary presentation on the report, the importance of which has been very well explained by Mr. Khawa.
Thank you, Aisha. Can you see my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Hassan Sir, for this very comprehensive introduction. And I think we take a lot of pride, and to a lot of extent, this speaks of your hard work that SEED is working so closely on this subject with the government. And I would also like to just add that this budget, which has been recently announced, it has actually seen some of the changes in the direction which you have informed. And it's heartening to see that SEED advocated for those changes. So congratulations to yourself and your team to start with. So just very quickly, I think building upon what you have said, what this presentation would add to is, of course, to amplify the key messages which you have just given in your presentation, but then also spend maybe just a couple of minutes on explaining factually the implications for government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in fiscal numbers. And then, of course, as you rightly said, that there are some policy steps in the pipeline which the government is taking. And Minister Saab, actually, when he joined us the last time, he also elaborated on some of these steps which are part of this report. And then finally, moving to some proposals which this report provides on relieving the fiscal pressure. Just to start with, I think our objective over here when we were attempting the first report was really to look at pensions with the lens that this is a budget line where some serious fiscal space can be created for priorities which the PTI government wants to undertake in human development, in infrastructure uplift of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And I think it's important that the government will be recalibrating the fiscal priority and rationalizing the expenditures. And of course, pensions reform would help over there. I think the three main messages that we need to put at the very outset, which the report talks about or tries to offer some explanation on. First is that this pension burden is becoming unsustainable, as you just showed in your fiscal cliff chart, which was in front of us. And of course, while the pension bill has increased tenfolds in a decade, it's set to grow by 18% in fiscal year 23, which should, of course, ring alarm bells for any finance team. And naturally, government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is looking into it, and proposals such as the one that we are presenting may help in this direction. The second big message is that Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is not the only province facing this problem. In fact, Ms. Nargis Sethi, whose inputs have been documented in this report, which is in front of our colleagues today, had explained that the Pay and Pension Commission at the federal level, which was reconstituted by the Prime Minister, will be evaluating the sustainability of the existing system and propose a new system and its implementation methodology, institutional framework, and timeline for implementation. And I'm very happy to see that some of the members of this Pay and Pensions Commission have joined us over here in today's session today, and their inputs are part of the report. The third big message, apart from the fact that this is a national issue, is that the pension system is a global exception, and the federal government now has the highest gross pension replacement rate for public sector employees across South Asia, if you look at the red line over here. And medical and other allowances are also part of the pension structure, which is keeping the replacement rate high in case of Pakistan. And pensions as percentage of the central, as percentage of the salary expenditure continues to be on the rise. So these against the backdrop of these three big messages which the report offers, we then studied the fiscal implications for the government in the short, medium, and longer term. And what one sees is that the federal transfers of the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa have actually shrank in fiscal year 21, and one hopes that this year will be less uncertain, less challenging, of course, and one hopes that with growth rate picking up, pressures from COVID-19 subsiding, one does hope that the federal transfers may increase. But these federal transfers, or even the provincial revenue increase which is expected, will still not fill in the gap or address the pressures which are being exerted by pensions expenditure that you see over here, which are increasing not just as a share of current spending, but also in absolute terms. And this, of course, is leaving very little pressure, very little room, as you can see, for the development expense if one looks at the fiscal framework for Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government. Likewise, these pressures from the pension side are not expected to diminish in the short run, unfortunately. And the number of retired has actually risen at an annual average growth rate of 7% since 2009. And this is pushing the number of pensioners added to the overall stock. And you can see it's almost a linear increase that you would continue to see in the shorter run. But staying with the shorter run, we also understand that there is popular pressure to regularize ad hoc or part-time employees in equivalent scales. And this pressure remains on any elected government. And this only adds to the mounting pressure of post-retirement liabilities. So when one talks about advocacy on pensions reforms, it's not about working with the numbers, it's also about convincing the stakeholders through a political economy lens that why, for example, ad hoc or part-time employees could really put the fiscal framework of a province like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or all other provinces for that matter, off track. We are also noticing that the multi-level hierarchy of eligible family members spans across 3 generations. And you can see over here in the pie that who are the beneficiaries in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa who actually receive these pensions. And there are 13 layers which excessively protract life of the pension itself. Over 1,300 of these pensioners or pension cases were actually initiated 50 years ago, and these are still active in the pension system, which sort of explains or demands some sort of a change in the legal framework or the rules which make this multi-level hierarchy of eligible family members to continue still in the system. Now, while the government is cognizant of this challenge, there has been some response from the government side. And of course, we are pleased to see that SEED has played a very significant role in bringing about or in providing technical inputs and in advocating some of these changes. First, I think it's heartening to see that government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has announced a contributory scheme in the budget fiscal year 22, and one hopes that the contours of this contributory scheme will be passed, will be laid out very soon with more clarity once, of course, the budget is passed. Second, we also understand that the Civil Servants Act in KP extended the minimum age for superannuation and early retirement. Third, an actuarial assessment has been commissioned to quantify current and future liabilities. Automation of pension records and disbursement is an ongoing task, and we'll just see how that has benefited in a while. And revisions in pensions rules have recently been approved to rationalize eligibility for pension benefits and the multi-level hierarchy of eligible beneficiaries that we had just discussed. While, of course, these policy steps are a very welcome sign, one also, of course, needs to put on the table that more needs to be accomplished. And there has to be a sense of urgency going forward. And in our report, we offer 6 key suggestions going forward, which we feel would ultimately relieve the fiscal pressures. First is that we need to find out ways on how does one manage the basic pay and its revisions in a manner that this does not impact the pension liabilities. Pensions are highly sensitive to pay increases, and the government could easily explore other avenues through which pays could be increased without impacting the pensions liabilities. The periodic pay revisions, which also consider emoluments such as ad hoc allowances, should be undertaken with care so that overall pensions burden doesn't increase. We also see and offer the second main solution in this regard, which is targeted divestment. And if the government has clear goals, for example, by fiscal year 23, government's pension liability could be at least 10% funded. And if this is a clear goal in front of us, we could earmark assets with matching duration and transfer them to pension fund to meet targeted milestones in pension liabilities. And the government could identify unused assets, for example, land, property, which may be leased, rented, sold, so that cash flows match the goal of these pension liabilities. The third proposal is about earmarking revenue sources for pensions contribution. And we suggest that pension contribution may be indexed to revenue growth, which will then obligate the government to prioritize pension servicing and set aside funds for this purpose above and beyond the current model, something which Hassan Sab also talked about in his slide. And there are certain tax heads which may be earmarked to, for example, ring fence revenue for pension contribution. For example, pensions tax, among other tax heads, may be considered. We have examples from other developing countries, other emerging market economies, for example, Costa Rica, where pension expenditure is now financed through a mix of a sales tax and other taxes in the fiscal system. Our fourth proposal talks about financial innovation options, and of course, raising debt through traditional banking and finance channels could be an obvious option, and this could be used to initiate a bailout program. And under this program, government employees could be offered an option to accept immediate partial payments in lieu of full future benefits, a model which has already been adopted in Illinois, but then later on in several other economies as well. Fifth, of course, a reason to simplify pension structure still remains, as we have advocated in the report. Overall family pension structure still remains complex, and further reforms are necessary to simplify and reduce the administrative costs associated with calculating, running, and regulating the pension scheme. And calculation of pensioner benefits is time consuming. And of course, there's a need to move away from the practice of anticipatory pensions. And this is a practice which is often seen when, of course, the determination of actual pension benefit is taking time, and you allow the beneficiaries to at least receive their benefits, which are called anticipatory pensions, a practice that we believe should be done away with and fairly quickly. And the last proposal that we have is to minimize the administrative costs and avoid leakages in the system. And we feel that centralizing and digitizing pension data has already addressed some of the problems related to ghost pensioners to a considerable extent. The problem of further adoption of IT-based solutions could help plug and prevent leakages and opportunities for misuse. And then these savings could ultimately be directed towards government contribution of pension liabilities. So these are the six main suggestions that we offer in the report. And of course, taking lead from the last or the previous month's consultation, which we have had, we are of course going to supplement these proposals next month, given that in many of you who joined us in the last month's webinar, we had discovered examples from within Pakistan, which can be replicated by other public sector entities, successful examples from within Pakistan, which can be replicated by other public sector entities. We would certainly make those proposals part of this report as well going forward. So with this, I think I can go back to Aisha, and I think in case Hassan Saab would like to add any further, or I can see some of the questions flowing in. If we have a couple of minutes, we can probably address some of the questions and comments, but it's over to you, Aisha.
Thank you, Dr. Bakar, and congratulations to you and your team. That is some brilliant work that you and Mr. Hassan Khawar's teams have put together. And the credit also goes to DFID and the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to taking lead on an issue of such importance. I believe our keynote speaker, Mr. Taimur Salim Khan Jhagra, is either late or would be unable to join us today because of the ongoing budget session. So I'd go back to Mr. Hassan Khawar for his remarks on the report presented by Dr. Bakar.
Gee, thank you, Aisha. I think what we can do is let's take a few questions very quickly because we could not.
Maybe Hassan Saab, while we are looking at the questions, if you would allow, we have one of the members of the Pay and Pensions Committee with us, Mr. Akil Khoja Saab. So if you allow, we could make him a panelist, and I think he would like to come in and offer his thoughts as a discussant on the report. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. We know Khoja Saab has been providing very insightful comments always, so it's great that we have him with us.
Absolutely. Ji, Akil Saab, please go ahead, Akil Saab.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Hassan Saab, and thank you, Bakar Saab. It's a very good report, I would say, very good initiative on part of the seats. And I would say hats up to the KPK government for at least going to some changes in the service rules for the eligibility part, because so far we have been discussing none of the provinces had actually gone through the change itself. Uh, while reading the report, I think I would say it's a well-defined problem statement. You have given the solutions as well, but I think from here, what it should lead to, it should lead to the development of a financing strategy for a pension fund wherein I believe we can, like you said in your statement, one of the proposals that contributions are indexed to the revenue growth. I need a clarification. You were saying it's revenue growth or to the revenue itself? Because I'm part of a study wherein we are proposing that your contributions are indexed to basically revenue. Today, assuming your contribution, I mean, your expenditure to the revenue GRR is 10%, I would say you take that as a benchmark for your government, and we will tell the government that your expenditure should not exceed 10%. And then go for the parametric reforms like early retirees, like you change the eligibility of the pensioners and similar other parametrics. Any savings in the cash flows that we generate through the parametric reform should go to the fund. And again, this funding strategy has to have an impact with the objective that, let's say today you are coming up with a DC scheme wherein you will have to have some additional expenditure as well, which pension fund can finance on your behalf, but that you have to put in some money sufficient enough into the fund that it can take care of those liabilities of the deceased people, and also to take care of the pensioners, let's say after 30 years. Uh, I know it's doable. It sounds we might not be able to do it, but uh, crust of the issue is that you have to fix a certain percentage of the revenue to bring in the contribution into your pension fund. If you can make that thing agree with your KPK government and then go for the parametric reforms, I think we are closer to the solution wherein, let's say after 30 years, this total expenditure will be off budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Khula Sahab. Wonderful comments. And we totally agree. I absolutely agree that a fund structure would be needed. But I think, thank you so much. I would want to take a few questions, Dr. Sahab, if you allow, and then we can refer them to you, or I can maybe answer some of them. So I'll start from the end. So I think there is a question by Abu Bakr Sadiq Saab, who is asking that what have you done in your proposal for those who are not government employees? And I'll get to that. I think we are also having someone from finance department who will be joining us shortly. But let me take this question. So I think the question refers to the pension payments for non-government employees, private employees. Like we have employee old age benefit institution, EOBI and others. I think Abu Bakr Saab, your question is relevant. That does not fall under the mandate of seats, but I absolutely agree that we need to move into that direction. But I think for the government to be able to effectively move on to that trajectory, or improve EOBI, or move on to a fully functional, robust private pension and benefit system, the government would need to first put its own house in order, have a very sound, good investment scheme in place, which is contributory, and then gradually the same could also be offered to private citizens. So, but I absolutely agree with you. We have someone before we move onwards. I can see Safir Saab from Finance Department. Can you hear us?
Safir Saab, you may be mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, so this is Safir Ahmed, Additional Secretary of Finance, and we are participating right from the Provincial Assembly. So our budget session is on, so we are here in the lobby of the Provincial Assembly.
Thank you, Safir Saab. So basically, I think just to give you a background, we have just presented a report on the pensions liability and the pension reforms which government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is undertaking. And of course, in this regard, of course, if there are any inputs that you would like to make, what, for example, measures you have suggested in this year's budget, for example, in managing the pensions liability, we do understand that there's a intent to move towards the contributory scheme. So we would really like to hear your thoughts. जो भी आप comfortably share कर सकें जी, updates.
As you will be aware, I think Hassan Sahib is well aware of our progress in the pension area. Like we were the first province to introduce the revised age from 60 to 61, but due to court complication and other issues, we have to step back from that. We reversed the 63-year back to 60 year. But in the present budget, we have introduced some reform. I will walk you through some important one in the pension areas. The most important one is that the provincial government has introduced contributory based pension scheme for the new entrants from the next financial year, July 1st. So everyone at any position who will be hired in future from July 1st down the line in the provincial government, he or she will have to contribute certain portion of the basic pay toward pension liability, which will be determined in 2 to 3 months, right from July to September. Secondly, we have a class of employees who are drawing executive allowance. The people who are working on the scheduled post, they are from section officer to the secretary or the chief secretary, and we have people from DSP or ASP up to the IGP. So, and we also these people also include the assistant commissioner up to the commissioner. Their executive allowance was earlier at the initial basic pay of 2017, but we have increased it from initial to the current basic pay. But at the same time, all these people who are 800 plus people in number will have to contribute 5% of the increased amount toward the pension payment during the year. A third one is we have a pension fund which have more than 53 billion rupees currently lying in the pension fund, and it is growing from 5 to 6 billion a year at the present policy rate. So the provincial government has decided to take annual profit of the pension fund and divert it toward payment of the pension. We are also planning to introduce in future, like we have introduced pension contribution, overall pension contribution for the new entrants. Plus, for certain class, they have to they are the existing civil servant, but they have to pay 5% of the increased amount, which come around to 100 million. It is a meager amount compared to 92 billion pension liability of the provincial government, but still we have taken a first step in the right direction. And the government is will introduce in coming years for the rest of the existing employees, like 0.5%, 0.1%, or any small percentage of their basic pay. They will have to pay toward the pension, and simultaneously we have approved the revised pension rule from the provincial cabinet. We have make it conservative, and previously it was 13 or 14 years down the line from the civil servant who retired. Now it will be available for the spouse, for the kids, and for the parents only. जी.
Okay, thank you, Safir Saab. I think you've presented a very good summary of what you're trying to do, and I think this is the direction that we need to take, and we are glad that we are partners in this endeavor. So बहुत शुक्रिया. हमारे पास सिर्फ कुछ सवालात हैं जो कि हम अभी ले रहे हैं very quickly, and of course you are, I know that you are joining us. With some difficulties that आप assembly से join कर रहे हैं, but you're happy to stay with us. और दो सवालात जो मैं यहाँ पे रखना चाह रहा हूँ और आप और हसान साहब अगर उसका जवाब देना चाहें. एक तो समीर अहमद साहब की तरफ से है, who is asking us that there are some litigation about raising the retirement age and a court ruling against the move. Has this now been sorted out? और दूसरा सवाल जो है वो खालिद रहीम साहब की तरफ से है, that what are those sources where KP pension administration could invest for regular profits? So पहले अगर समीर साहब का सवाल का हम जवाब देना चाहें कि जो litigation का मामला है on retirement age.
सफीर साहब आप म्यूट में हैं.
Okay. So the litigation problem is solved now. And the brief history was like we increased the retirement age from 60 to 63, and some people knocked the door of Peshawar High Court, and Peshawar High Court strike down the amendments in the civil servant which the provincial government made, and we appeal in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court remand back the case to Peshawar High Court to decide it on merit. But in the meantime, the government decided to take back the increase in retirement age decision, and now, after approval of the provincial government, we have reversed the retirement age from 63 to 60 back. So now this issue is resolved. But at the same time, we have introduced a qualifier in the early retirement area. Like earlier, it was for anyone who completed 25 years of service, he or she can retire voluntarily. But we introduced a qualifier, and insertion was added to the Civil Servant Act and rules as well. And it says that anybody who completed 25 years of qualifying service or 55 years of age, whichever come late. So anybody who is below 55 years of age, he or she cannot opt out from the civil servant and can't go on under a voluntary retirement. And sorry, what was the second question?
Second question था, what are the sources in KP administration जहाँ से regular profits आते रहें या returns आते रहें जो KP की pension को fund करते, pension liabilities को fund करते रहें?
Okay, so the main source of pension funding was the taxpayer money. Like we have to, the fund was created in 1999 with few million rupees, but from time to time, every year, depending upon the cash flows of the provincial government injected 2 to 5 billion each year, and at the same time it grow roughly 8 to 10% per year. So the main source was the taxpayer money. Like we made provision in budget, and it was then injected into the pension fund, and at the same time it was invested in mainly in fixed income, and it grow from 8 to 10% on average on annual basis. So these were the two avenues from where the pension fund was has grown and reached it to this stage. But recently, due to COVID and fiscal deficit at the central as well as at the provincial level, we are unable to inject funds into the pension fund. Like the injections from the provincial government are discontinued from last 2 to 3 years.
Thank you, Safir Sahab. And I think that's the alarming or the cause for concern I think, which you have just noted. So thank you very much. We could quickly take maybe two more questions. One is with regards to simplification regime. And Syed Shujat has asked that can we have a unified and simplified form of pension claim across all organizations? Because currently, of course, the claim and the forms may vary, particularly if these are autonomous or semi-autonomous bodies under the government. There is also a question, and Hassan Sahab, this is a question which I would request you to take. I think there may be a misperception that such reforms could affect employee motivation. And the question has been asked by Nisar Khan Sahab, that have we considered the employee satisfaction level, their motivation, their efficiency or performance, which may be affected through these reforms? So I think most of these reforms, in my view, would of course protect or enhance the efficiency, but I think we should also take your response here as well. So over to both of you.
Unmute. Okay, so responding to your first question, which says that let's have a very simplified pension claim form. So the provincial government is like finance department is mainly dealing with the civil servant pension, and we have an Android application, and we integrated our HR data with the pension. So anyone who is retired from our HR database, so we integrated it with our pension database, and he or she can go to or approach our Android app, and after inserting his or her personnel ID, which is a unique one for every government employee, and if he or she opted for pension calculation, so the system has the capacity to calculate the pension for him or her, as well as filled the pension papers which are available presently, and upon which you have to submit your pension claim to the payment office. So what the pensioner has to do, he or she has to go through the particulars, and if there is any change, he or she can make the changes, and then simply download the pension papers, got it signed from the respective authority, and submit it for pension payments. So there are some legal complications due to which we can't reduce numbers of the pension paper, but what we have made for ease of the pensioners to integrate our pension data with our HR database, and it is available to every employee. Everyone can download our pension app from our Play Store and other internet applications, and can use it for filling and calculating his or her pension.
Thank you, Safir Saab. And Hassan Saab, if I can invite your response on the employee motivation question and the perception that pensions reform could actually or perhaps hurt any morale of the employees. Ji Hassan Saab.
Ji, thank you, Dr. Saab. So I just want to make it very clear that employee motivation and employee well-being is the foremost concern during these pension reforms. And that's why I use the word compassionate pension reforms. And I'm not just saying that because we are part of this process. I'm saying that given the current political situation, given the political economy of the problem, if you do not keep well-being of the employees at the center of any reform efforts, these cannot succeed. And any effort to create a sustainable pension mechanism would, number one, ensure that employees have a secured future, they have better investment options, and any employee who has already been in the government service is given an option to voluntarily get into that scheme. So in all, I believe that if anything, such reforms are going to increase employee motivation and not vice versa. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan Saab. Very quickly, I think, although we have to close this in just 2 to 3 minutes, but I think Dr. Murtaza Sahito has asked a very pertinent question, that when you look at the pension slip which a pensioner receives, the medical allowance is also part of the pension. And maybe with some policy recommendation in future, or some financial innovation, this could be linked to or be part of the health card facility which KP government is providing, which of course could be one innovative way of financing the medical allowance, which on its own would also continue to increase given the growing medical needs at the time of superannuation age, where one needs a serious medical cover. So I think, Murtaza, basically, of course, as this was a comment, I think, again, in view of your recommendation, this is again something which we can suggest to the finance department and their team to study. And certainly there are 3 or 4 allowances which make part of the pension slip, and point well taken. And given that there are other alternate provisions of social protection, including the health card, some portion of that can be considered. And as we're all for financial innovation to address this pensions challenge. So point well taken over here. So unless Safir Saab or Hassan Saab would like to add anything further over here, I would be handing it back to Ms. Aisha Ilyas.
Thank you, Dr. Waqar. Well, I would like to thank Mr. Akil Raza Khoja for his valued input for our audience's knowledge. Mr. Khoja is Private Member Pay and Pension Commission, and Mr. Safir Ahmed for stepping in place of Mr. Taimur Salim Khan Jhagra. Mr. Safir Ahmed is Additional Secretary, Department of Finance, Government of KPK. Thank you for taking out the time amid the budget proceedings. For the closing remarks, I'd request Mr. Hassan Khawer for a vote of thanks and his closing remarks. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Aisha. I once again thank, first of all, SDPI and Dr. Waqar, you for organizing this launch event, helping us throughout the development of the policy note. I am especially grateful to Akil Raza Khoja Saab, who not only has given comments today, but he has been giving comments and providing very valuable feedback throughout in all our sessions. I am very grateful to Safir Saab, because Safir Saab, I must say, towards the very end, is not just any additional secretary. He has been the champion of pension reforms, and from day one, he has been steering this process. There are a lot of team members who have been part and parcel of these efforts, and I want to thank them. But most of all, I want to thank Secretary of Finance and Minister of Finance, Atif Saab and Taimur Salim Khan Jhagra Saab, who have been instrumental in driving this reform. And I hope that this work and these recent steps would usher in a new phase of pension reforms, which, as I said earlier, would set an example, not just for KP, but for Punjab, Sindh, Balochistan, and the federal government. And thank you everyone for sparing time and for joining us for this launch event. We are very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan Saab and Waqar Saab and the rest of the participants. It was a very good discussion, and let me catch up the rest of the proceedings of the assembly session. So I thank you all. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you. Bye.